everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. So my name's Joe Winchester. That's me in the right-hand side of that picture. That's one of the last conferences I was at with a smiling face with my colleagues Stu Boston and Tim Kirstel, handing out T-shirts at an open source summit. And now I'm virtually talking to you all about Zowe. So Zowe, what it means for the mainframe and how it works. We've only got 25 minutes, so I'm going to try and clip along here. So three things I'd like you to remember, and I'm going to try and use these as the theme for my presentation. Zowe is more than tech, it's a community. I really want to focus on the community of Zowe. It's open, simple, familiar. Those taglines you'll see we try to follow within Zowe as our kind of sort of ethos. And also very important with the mainframe, it's all of the old with all of the new. We're trying to bring a new generation of people, a new technology that has come along since the mainframe, make that work with the mainframe for people who are familiar with that technology, but also not leave behind people who really understand how mainframes work as well. So we're trying to bring both those two together. So Zowe is owned and managed by the Open Mainframe Project, which is part of the Linux Foundation. Every time I go to linuxfoundation.org, I'm astonished by the amount of software that they have and they are the stewards of. Phenomenal. And just have a look there, and that's just a few Jenkins. We've got Open API, Mocha, Kubernetes, Linux, obviously, Automotive Linux, Zowe, Hyperledger. So they really are the stewards and the champions of enterprise-grade open source tech. Now, why is that important? So sometimes when I talk to people about open source, they say, yeah, I've got an open source project, and they probably have a repo, github.com/whatever, and they made it available under an open source license. But then does that mean anybody can participate? Anybody can see what they're doing next. Anybody can get involved in their planning. They have an election process, governance and so forth. And the answer is probably that's where you'll find perhaps others answer that question, differently. That's not the case within Zowe. So within Zowe, for sure, we're open source, and you can see all of our source. But you can also see all of our issues. So you can search for our issues. We have a lot of conversations that you can search through and find. It's a very sort of welcoming community. And not only that, you can see raise new issues. You can see the issues squads are being worked on. You can go to the Zen Hub boards. You can pick issues off. That one, particular one there from the CLI is flagged as good first time. If you want to get involved and participate, you can fork the repo, fix an issue, give it back, create a pull request and have it reviewed, so you can kind of earn open source participation. And there's actually a journey to where you might even one day end up becoming a squad leader or perhaps a Zowe leadership committee leader. It's a very open, welcoming, diverse, friendly community. Within the documentation itself, for example, I've got the docs on the left, but on the right, the documentation tells you how to write documentation, build your own local docs, and actually end up fixing it. It's quite meta that the documentation tells you how to fix the documentation. And you can just create an issue with a troubleshooting tip anytime you feel like it. And a lot of customers do, and those get in the product. We use Slack. I run it on my phone. Sometimes I run it on my desktop. You can chat to the squad, see what's going on, ask questions, get help. All of our meetings, squad meetings, leadership calls, they're all open, they're all in Zoom. You can join them, see the calendar. The important ones are recorded, system demos every time a release goes out. So there's a blog site, very successful blog site. I'm just going to shout out to it, medium.com/Zowe. You can see some great blog authors here, core and again, ecosystem. If there's a blog about something that extends Zowe, it's part of the ecosystem around Zowe, you'll see that clearly delineated. So what I'm going to do now is rattle through each of the four major components of Zowe: command line interface, Zowe Explorer, Zowe Desktop, and the API Mediation Layer. And I'm going to finish up a little bit with some future stuff. Talk about it as the command line interface, or the CLI. So the CLI is actually really important. So sometimes people think it's odd that Zowe, which is about modernizing a mainframe, has a command line interface. But don't be fooled. Docker has a very powerful command line interface. Git has a command line interface. A lot of modern ways that developers, system programmers interact with software is through a command line interface. So the Zowe CLI is really positioned to fill that need. Now, this is a Zowe architectural diagram, and I'll cover this as I go through the technical part of the presentation. The CLI is sort of in the top right-hand corner, a little box up here, which is the Zowe CLI. And what I'll talk about first is how the Zowe command line interface interacts with Zowe SMF on the back end, which is part of ZOS operating. Okay, after you've installed the command line interface, which needs Node, when you type commands, so you type Zowe and it tells you what the CLI can do. So it reveals the help to you as you type it. It's based around the concept of groups. Now the base groups it comes with start ZOS. These are some extensions I'll cover a little bit later on. And you can see we can work with TSO, console, jobs, workflows. But if the next thing I want to do is I want to work with files, I can type ZOS files or the shorter word of files. So when I type Zowe files, it'll say, well, hey ho, now I know you want to do files. The response for the help is based upon what I've asked it to do. It's the information I'm now missing. So, okay, I can do lots of files. I can copy, I can create, I can download. I'm interested in listing files. So now as I say Zowe files list, what you'll see is it says, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to list members? Do you want to work with the data sets, which is the MVS file system, or perhaps want to work with the Unix file system? I particularly want to work with data sets. And when I say data sets help, it'll tell me all of the information I can do, including samples. This is really nice. And this is not just for the core CLI that comes, but everybody who extends it gets it. It's built upon a framework called Imperative. It's a very nice touch that the Zowe CLI's got. Makes it very useful. Now, sometimes when I'm showing people CLI, they say, well, I can just log onto the mainframe and issue TSO commands, or I can log onto the mainframe with SSH, and that's iShell or something like that. You can, but then you're on the mainframe. You're on the mainframe's world. You're on the, the acidic mainframe with all the software that you've got. I'm issuing these from my Mac, from my PC, from my laptop. So I can say Zowe files list datasets and get my datasets back. But because it's on my laptop, I can fuse it with tools on my laptop. And that's really the power. That's the sort of familiar tagline in Zowe. So I can just use grep. I can actually get the responses back in JSON if I want to, which is really neat because then I can actually programmatically manipulate that. And that's very powerful. If I look at tools like automation tools, so this is a shell script. This is a real shell script written by a colleague of mine for a presentation, Steve Horsman. And it's Unix shell script. It would be familiar for people who know Unix shell script. It's a familiar part, bringing people to the mainframe that know off-platform languages and off-platform tools and techniques. But when they want to manipulate their mainframe, Zowe ZOS files, create dataset classic, upload. These are not unfamiliar to a Unix shell developer. There are samples in the Zowe's GitHub for Groovy, which is very popular for Jenkins pipelines. There's Ansible samples. Samples of PHP, Perl R, I think, Ruby possibly. So you can bring people that aren't familiar with the mainframe, but are familiar with scripting and automation and other tools off platform to the mainframe. And that's really that power. That's really that fusion of the two worlds together. That is really the sweet spot. Now, if you don't know the Zowe's help for the commands, it's got a really cute feature where you type Zowe -HW and it launches all of the help in an online browser. Sorry, an online browser, just in a browser on your desktop. And you can type and search, and if I type the word, I think I typed the word submit, it will say, oh, great, what's up with submit? And I can see the syntax. And as you get extensions, these are all built in here. So this online help is a really nice touch. It's extensible. So think back to the games platform. The success of the games platform and the coffee pod is what you can get on top of it. So within Zowe right now, I can go to npm.js, which is the online registry for Node packages. And I can see lots of extensions, and I can see there's one for ZOS Connect, which is an IBM product. There's base one, so this is a vendor product, and Broadcom have got one for their product called CA Spool. In fact, that's 32 packages. Backing all of this is what's known as a conformance program. So each major component of Zowe has a conformance program. This is something really nice that comes from the Linux Foundation, sort of OMP stewardship. It's this insistence that if you build something to extend it, you can get a badge, you have to fill in a form which is written by the people who sort of know the technology that says these are the touch points. What it means is that when you download a conformance extension, you know it works, it's a good citizen, it behaves well with the imperative, with the online help and single sign-on and things like that as well. But it also means when you build a conformant plugin that the base won't change within version 1. The APIs that you use are sort of hardened APIs, and here is a 22 conformant plugins. So what's really neat, let's go back to the architecture diagram. So the Zowe core CLI talks to the base ZOS. What about those extensions I mentioned that are sort of 32 extensions? These are just four on the architecture diagram. There are others. CA Endeavor is one, IBM ZOS Connect, Rocket have some DB2 tools. Phoenix Software have one for EJES. These tend to talk sort of kind of one-on-one with their back ends, and this works great. But what you end up with is you end up with the sweet spot, which is where all you need to do is install the Zowe command line interface on your laptop and install the extension, and it works with the back end. But you have a choppy experience with passwords and ports having to be known. You have a configuration sort of complexity there. Zowe also has a ZOS component, big, powerful ZOS component. And if that ZOS component is installed, what it does is it changes this slightly because you just connect the command line interface to the API gateway in the ZOS component, and that does all of the connectivity to the backend that you need to. You don't need to know where these are located. It can also do things like load balancing as well, which is quite nice. It can also present a single certificate. So if the certificate was self-signed, perhaps, or not trusted, you would have a trusted certificate, single certificate from here. And it also, which is a very nice feature that was put in 2020, because it's an edge server and it's a proxy, a reverse proxy gateway, it gives you the ability to do single sign-on. Your password is only used once, and which ultimately gives you the ability to do multi-factor authentication. Okay, so the next component I'd like to talk about is the Zowe Explorer. Also, it's a VS Code plugin. So VS Code, I think, is a #1 popular IDE, and the Zowe Explorer sits conceptually on top of the Zowe CLI. So the Zowe CLI is written in Node. So not only does it have a command line textual interface, it also has a lot of Node classes and Node packages that do a lot of the heavy lifting to do with talking down to ZOSMF to get the data. The Zowe Explorer sits on top of that and creates the plugin to VS Code. So architecturally, it looks a little bit like that. To get the Zowe Explorer, you could go to the VS Code Marketplace, which is directly accessible from within VS Code itself. You just click this little doohickey right now for extensions, type in the word Zowe, and you'll see the Zowe Explorer. 14,000 downloads. So when I last showed this at a conference, it hadn't even passed 3,000 downloads. I think it did that back in March this year. That was in Sharon in Fort Worth in Dallas. And if I wind back time a little bit further, on February, when Zowe version 1 came out, the Zowe Explorer didn't even exist. It was actually only added in April. So one of the nice things that makes me love working in open source is if the kitchen has the right ingredients and the right cooks and the right recipe, and lots of open doors for people to come in and be welcomed, good things happen. And this is definitely much a good thing that happened within Zowe's lifetime already. Zowe's only about a year and a half old. So let's go and have a look at the Zowe Explorer. VS Code is an IDE that lets you edit files. Because it's built on the CLI same packages, it can connect directly through to the data sets, Unix system services and jobs. And I have a nice COBOL file. This is a PDS member, open directly, and I can edit it and save this straight back on the mainframe. And I've got an extension that lets me syntax highlight COBOL, and because I've got that from the marketplace as well, those all get blended together and you get this really nice fusion experience. So let's look at some of the function. You have the concept of favorites, so you can bookmark your favorite high-level qualifiers, or you can select them and expand them. You can connect to multiple systems at the back end or work with them directly. You can create members, submit jobs. Once you submit a job, you get a little sort of hyperlink, tells you the job. And when you click that, you can actually go directly to the job. Or you can filter jobs. And when you open a spool file for a job, because it's built within VS Code, you get this sort of thumbnail view that lets you go up and down. You can do Control F. I've done a little search. You can see the occurrences of this. It's a very nice productivity tool. You don't have to, sometimes in STSF, I'm constantly having to sort of PF my way to the right-hand side of my screen and do, find and top and bottom commands in STSF. You can just do this with a very familiar sort of control up, control down commands. You can also work with Unix files and Unix directories. One of my favorites here is you can just upload files, and you can just upload files straight from your desktop, straight into a USS directory. You don't need to have a separate connection or SFTP or or do an SSH SCP or anything like that. That's really quite cute. And that goes over HTTPS, and that will, because this is built on top of the CLI that has single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, you're still having the same authentication credentials and the same security that ZOSMF provides on the back end. So one of the neat things about the Zowe Explorer is where it's used. So Zowe is part of the Open Mainframe project, and one of the things that the Open Mainframe project worked with some collaborators this year to do, actually. Last year, it finished this year. GitHub.com Open Mainframe project COBOL programming course. The need was recognized to have a training course to teach people COBOL using the tools of the day, which is VS Code. And the Zowe Explorer squad are very proud, and I'm very proud for them, that the VS Code plugin, the Zowe Explorer, is actually featured in the course. So people learning COBOL are taught this using the Zowe Explorer. But it's perhaps one of the reasons why it's got so many, thousands of downloads. This is my buddy, Jeff Bisty, a phenomenal sort of personality in the mainframe community. Master Mainframe is wearing his t-shirt proudly there. And he created a video that was uploaded on the same day that the course was uploaded. He was one of the people who worked on the course. He's already got 61,000 views. So the video isn't called Look How Cool Zowe Is. The video is called Introduction to COBOL Training Course. It's what you find when you go to YouTube, and you're learning it through the Zowe Explorer. So there's something really nice when the technology of Zowe is sold by the problem it solves rather than the technology. That's a really nice thing. Little on this story, we're all in lockdown and pandemic or whatever's going on in our sort of geography that we're at right now. When the pandemic happened, there was actually a demand. If I look at job searches, there was a big spike in the need for COBOL. And one of the reasons was because a lot of transactional sort of government systems, supporting people through the pandemic, was written in COBOL on the back end. So the course, and by sort of reflexive glory, the training course and the Zowe Explorer got attention from that, and it got eyes. And also within the COBOL, there's something called COBOL Fridays that's great, and I join this sometimes. And what I love is the COBOL Fridays features the Zowe Explorer on their graphic. And there was one I joined just a month ago, running a COBOL program. The whole thing was taught using the Zowe Explorer, which is just fabulous. If you want to find out more, I'll just give a shout out to two phenomenal people in the Zowe community. This is Bill Pereira. He's part of the Zowe Onboarder Squad. He's got a playlist, lots of great educational videos he's got about using the Zowe Explorer. And he's also got ones about Node and Ansible and Zowe, and also Jelly, Jessalyn Pudongban, who's actually also speaking at this conference in some of the later talks. She has a YouTube channel called Mainframe Bytes. She's part of the Zowe Explorer Squad, and she's got some great material on the Zowe Explorer that's definitely worth checking out if you want to find out more. Okay, so the next major component of Zowe we're going to take a look at is the Zowe Desktop. Now, the Zowe Desktop doesn't require anything to run on a laptop other than a browser. It runs in a browser. It runs in here it is in Chrome, Firefox. It's tested against a number of kind of modern browsers. And one of the advantages of that over perhaps something like the Zowe Explorer, which requires VS Code to be installed, is that certainly within a lot of mainframe shops that I visit, they actually have an issue deploying things onto desktops. There's a cost associated with it. There's a management associated with it, some internal perhaps policies or politics or charging about how mainframe groups can get things onto their corporate IT desktops. So, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why the 3270 has still, to a certain extent, remained the sort of prevalent mainframe interface that people use, despite all the modernization efforts that have kind of occurred within the mainframe's life cycle. So I'm very excited that the Zowe Desktop exists, because that really cuts right through it in terms of a sort of Gordian knot, in that all you need is the browser. So here I am logging onto the Zowe Desktop with my TSO user ID and password. Now, within the Zowe Desktop, it has a theme almost like your own sort of laptop OS itself. You have a kind of app launch bar in the bottom left with the applications. You can pin them on the bottom. You can customize how it looks. And when you launch applications, they run sort of picture in picture within the browser. So here I've got I kind of one of the themes right at the start. Remember, I talked about the things I was going to hark back to was all of the old was all of the new. So there is a 3270 emulator within the Zowe Desktop. And you can see on the right, I actually have an ISP of 3.4 dataset member open. And that same member, I'm actually browsing on the left-hand side with a sort of nice, rich graphical tree. And the two can work side by side within the desktop. And remember, I'm only logged on once, I'm only authenticated once, but I'm accessing these multiple applications. We'll see a little bit more about how that works later on. Likewise, Zowe Explorer is a kind of GUI equivalent for SDSF, which I'm showing on the right, both able to work. So you can have a rich, a kind of new experience where you can very easily scroll up and scroll left and search within your job, spool files, or you can use SDSF if that's what you're more comfortable with. And again, with Unix, that's ISPF 3.17, or we have something called the USS Explorer. And we actually have a terminal as well. Some folks I know actually don't like or prefer the picture-in-picture, and they actually like to take a Zowe Desktop application and launch it full screen. And you can do that. You can select the graphic on the little launch bar and right mouse click it and just say open in new browser tab. And you can spend all day working in this. You can spend all day working in ISPF or SDSF or iShell or the TSO or commands directly logged onto the mainframe if that's what you want. And again, the nice sweet spot with this, which I actually know one company who deployed Zowe just to get this, is that there's nothing required on the desktop. They don't actually now need terminal emulator software. You're just running within a browser. So that's nice. Something that the squad did this year, which is very cute, is you have more customization options. Some people, when they first saw the Zowe Desktop, they said, well, it's a bit jarring. I didn't like the color theme. Not a problem. You can select your own color. You can upload graphics, drag and drop graphics. You can change your password, either at login or just on an ad hoc basis, which is useful. Perhaps it's expired or you just want to change it. You can select the language. And as part of the Zowe Conformance program, all of the applications that support language translation will then respond to that same request and then work. And I see it in Japanese and I see desktops in French and things. Here I've customized my desktop with Linux Foundation background and a few other apps as well. So now the neat thing, remember, Zowe is not just about what you get in the tin, but what you can extend it with. The success of open source and the success of Zowe are the apps within it, the ecosystem, the bazaar that surrounds the cathedral. Okay, so let's look at how the Zowe Desktop works. So within my browser, you're connecting through the mediation layer, nice single certificate, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication challenge, bunch of address spaces, sort of microservices doing things like those UIs I showed you beforehand, and the 3270 emulator, the SSH running through a node server. There's actually a cross-memory server in the back end. I won't dwell on that too much, but the nice thing about extensibility is if I look at here, I can have an extensions within the Zowe Desktop, and those extensions can either be iframes or they can actually be more native. They can be sort of Angular or React extensions, and they likewise can go through the API mediation layer and talk to the existing server or the existing UI or REST API server on the back end. Like the Zowe CLI, there's a conformance program for those extensions or those plugins to work on. And when they're extended, they will appear in the search bar on the left. So this is our base search bar. This is a screenshot of one for Sega Software. Roy Boxwell from Sega Software. There's a video that he did. If you just Google for Sega and Zowe, he co-presented for Zowe Day at Share recently, and he showed a couple of their apps that they've got within the Zowe Desktop. And coming up next, there's a nice screenshot of one from Roy's video where they're showing the SQL Workload Expert for DB2 running in the Zowe Desktop. So again, that benefits from multi-factor authentication, which was a sweet spot for them. And that's the power of the Zowe Desktop, is you have these base products run in the browser, zero install on the client, extensible, and they're all backed by single sign-on, which has got multi-factor authentication for the Zowe Desktop. But by no means least, we're going to look at the Zowe API Mediation Layer. So we've talked about it a little bit already to do with the CLI and the web desktop. They're both clients on the client side running on laptops, either in your browser or where your Jenkins server or your automation server is. They're connecting to services on z/OS. The mediation layer sits in the middle. It's an edge server. It's on the edge of your network. It's actually based upon Netflix Zoole, which obviously is a very scalable, internet videos at scale. And it provides a number of really key services. And the first service it provides is authentication. So when you authenticate, you're not authenticating to the server beneath you on z/OS. You're authenticating to the mediation layer. It'll generate a token. And that token is then used on, stored by the client, either in the browser cookie or the CLI, That's used on subsequent requests back and forth. The mediation layer will then either flow that to the server, depending on how it's registered itself, or will use a pass ticket. So you get multi-factor authentication, single sign-on experience. And that was something that I know with listening to Roy Boxwell talk about Sega software coming to Zowe. That was one of the killer apps that they needed to deliver to their customers, and the Zowe API Mediation Layer gave it to them. It also gives you configuration simplicity, because if you look at all of these services here, perhaps they're using TLS 1.2 and Secure Socket Layer. They might all have individual certificates. Perhaps some are self-signed. Some certificates expire at different dates. With the Zowe Mediation Layer, there's a single certificate that your browser client has to, or your CLI client has to validate the trust and store in its trust store. The mediation layer has to be configured, obviously, to trust all of these. But once that's occurred, you have a much easier client configuration. Also, you need to connect to a single port. You don't need to know where all of these are. It provides some other services as well. It provides an API catalog. The API catalog is actually cute for developers, because if you look at, these are the 5 services that come with Zowe, and the API catalog, if a service has Swagger, it can publish its Swagger, and you have this nice try it out now. So you can see here the datasets filter, and you can just hit a button, execute, and you can see the result of a REST API. You can get the curl statement to just copy and paste it into your favorite, curl application that can issue curl commands. And that's really cute. You don't need to have Swagger to benefit from reverse proxy services, but Swagger definitely helps with usability. If you the discovery service is interesting. So based upon Netflix rule, if a request comes into a server, these are all the servers that we bring up by default. We bring up one instance of, the Explorer that we saw in the Zowe Desktop. We bring one instance of the APIs server for the files APIs that we saw. But if multiple are brought up, it'll say 2, 3, 4, 5. And what happens is when the request comes in from the client, it sends it to the most available server. And there's a different number of algorithms. Round robin is the most basic, or depending on whether your server instance and how it registers itself with the API gateway, you can have more sophisticated sort of health checking and whether you're available. But you basically get workload management through that, and you get the dispatching of services to the most available server. That's a very nice, interesting feature of the API gateway. Now, remember, Zowe is not just what you get in the tin, it's also the community of people who can extend it. That's very important, and I hope you picked that theme up through that entire presentation. So if we look at a couple of boxes here, we saw Sega's earlier with their product. They were able to onboard their existing server up through the API gateway, benefit from MFA and some workload balancing. Another one I'll quickly show you, IMS. It's something we did previously. So IMS Connect lets you talk to IMS, but Zowe has an IMS Operations API server, and the IMS CLI can talk to that through that. So you can get the multiple dispatching, you can get the single sign-on multi-factor authentication, and also within the API catalog, if you think back, I just showed 5 within IMS. When that's registered, the 6th one appears there, and you can click it, and you can try it out now, and you can test those IMS Operations APIs. Just as the CLI, just as the Zowe Desktop as a conformance program, API Mediation Layer, and these are the products that have Zowe conformance, and there's a really nice set of products there, and I know there's some others that have applied that'll be coming soon. And just finally, to finish out, let's have a look at what Zowe's done this year and what it's looking to the future. So the theme for this year really was enterprise ready for Zowe. SMP was available with a long-term support program for version 1.9 at the start of the year. We've had PTFs, roll-up PTFs delivered as SMP APAs since then. ZOSMF workflows have been included for installation and configuration of key components of Zowe. Certificates were first introduced into USS key stores, which is a Java key store, and customers told us that they liked having their certificates managed in key rings. That's just got added. Single sign-on, multi-factor authentication was included. Lots more features that really make Zowe more enterprise ready, and more enterprises are basically installing Zowe and extending Zowe for their products. And the futures, we're really doubling down on that. That's a very successful strategy. So client-side certificates are being added soon. Customers have said that they want Zowe to be a sort of always up endpoint. They want high availability, sysplex awareness of Zowe. Zowe has a lot of Java and Node in its stack. If you think back to that architecture diagram, customers have said that they want parts of that available to run in containers, either on platform, perhaps on the CCX or Z Linux, or perhaps off platform as well. That's very interesting. strategy that we're taking Zowe in, and the Zowe Explorer, which you saw earlier, is hugely important component. Underpins the COBOL training the Open Mainframe project did. There's a conformance program for that. Some vendors have said that they'd like to extend that for some of their DevOps tools as well. So that's something that you'll see coming soon within Zowe. And the most important thing, Zowe is more than technology, it's a community. Join the community. That's how Zowe's future is. It's unwritten, it's all in our hands, and some is in mine, some is in Open Mainframe project, but most of all, whoever you are, wherever you are listening, the future of Zowe is in your hands. All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of the conference. There's some great presentations lined up. Cheers.